Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks to the organizers. This is going to be a little bit of a different talk. It's going to be a talk about vaccination hesitancy. And it is also going to be a talk that's been inspired by a project that I am doing with my brother, who's an art professor at the University of Alberta, where he helped us bring together renowned artists from all over the world to do work on vaccination hesitancy. And this is a project that has been generously supported by numerous entities, but also the work that I'm doing with Lauren and Michael around hepatitis C and vaccination. Now, we are doing a lot of cool work with this team. We have just submitted a paper today on the policy issues around doing challenge research in vaccination. We've also done research on doing work with vulnerable populations. But we really thought, the organizers and myself and Lauren thought this was a great topic because there is so much going on right now. There's so much noise out there around vaccination hesitancy in the United States, stuff that's happening right now all over the world where we have vaccination hesitancy becoming a larger and larger problem. We have these stories just over the last couple weeks here in Canada, and of course, all of the ridiculous stuff in the United States. So we thought this was a great opportunity to talk to this community because this community, I think, matters, and this community can play an important role to turn this around. People believe crazy things, you guys. People believe crazy things. This is a study that was done in the United States, just to give you a sense of what's going on out there. I wish I did this study, where they ask people about conspiracy theories, medical conspiracy theories, and what they believe. And there's been a lot of research on this, and I picked this study. Just to give you a taste, I'm not going to go through all this, the kinds of things that people are willing to believe. This first one, the FDA is deliberately holding back known cures for cancer because of the drug companies, right? 37% of the people agree with that, and 31% say, yeah, that sounds possible, yeah. And then look at this one. Here's the vaccination hesitancy one. And this is very consistent with other research that's been done here. I'll tell you about that in a bit. Doctors and the government still want to vaccinate kids even though they know, right? That's the wording. They know vaccines cause autism and other psychological problems. And look at that, 20%, very consistent. 36% say, possible. Here's another one I want to highlight because I've never heard of it before. There's the global dissemination of genetically modified foods by Monsanto as part of a secret program. It's not secret anymore, I guess, called Agent 21. Have you guys heard of this? No? You know about it now, and the goal is to shrink the world population. That's a pretty serious conspiracy. Now, what I find fascinating about this study, and there's been other studies that have shown this, is look at the number of people, there's so few people that are willing to say they disagree, right? It's shocking, right? So this is a problem, and part of it is pop culture. Part of it is pop culture and the noise that's going on around pop culture. There's, of course, so much anti-vax stuff out there in pop culture. You have, and what we find fascinating, we've studied this, is it's portrayed to the public completely uncritically. This is from the UK, where you have this story about this woman making this informed decision not to vaccinate her child, and it's very portrayed as an empowering idea. You have Robert De Niro, who I used to like a lot, where he pushing an anti-vaccination agenda. Have you guys seen this? Right, and it's in People magazine, completely uncritical. It's as if this is a balanced story. You have this reality television star, again, why we've decided not to vaccinate our kids. And of course, all of this has been amplified very recently in the United States because of this guy, right? I'm sorry, I should have given you a little bit of warning before I put his face up. And right now, we have an anti-vax president. Now, he would say he's not anti-vax, but he is, because he has consistently talked about the link between autism and vaccination. This audience knows this. Is there any evidence to support this? Of course not. So Trump gets a red X right under his face there. In fact, let's just keep going. This is absolutely enraging. And we can look at data here in Canada that shows very similar numbers. You know, it's easy to point our fingers in the United States, but look at the study that was done by a colleague of mine, Josh Greenberg at Carleton, where he found that more than 1 in 4 Canadians have some degree of vaccination hesitancy that's tied, this is the important thing, tied to this autism and mental health myth, right? So, and I truly believe that this is largely, or not entirely, but that popular culture and celebrities have a role to play in creating that, at least keeping that myth alive. And I just want to give you a sense of the absurdity that's out there, because you guys are all so sophisticated. You don't follow this at all. I'm not, so I do. And this is Katy Perry. Does everyone recognize Katy Perry? One of the most famous people alive. What's she doing here? She's on the cover of Vogue magazine, and she's telling us that she went on a cleanse, a detox. And how many people in this room have never heard of a detox or a cleanse? Which is remarkable, right? If I asked that question 7 years ago, it would have been completely different, and that's because of celebrities, because celebrities are talking about this all of the time. So she went on a cleanse because she wanted to just glow for this cover of Vogue magazine. No, it's not the Photoshop, it's not the genetics, it's not the world-class photographer. It was the cleanse, apparently, that made her glow. And this idea of cleansing and detoxing has taken off. And why am I bringing it up? Because now it's being put forward by practitioners all over as an alternative to vaccination, right? As a way to boost your immune system, right? So here's an example, naturopathic clinic. I think this is actually from Canada. Where they have hydrotherapy, which is, by the way, which is code for enema, and dietary cleanses. Look at the middle one. Again, a naturopathic clinic. They actually recommend that you let yourself get the flu. They're recommending that people get the flu because it's a way of detoxing your system. It puts your body back in harmony and allows you to shed toxins, right? How infuriating is that when you think of the number of individuals that die every year from influenza, right? And they're making this recommendation uncritically, right? Unmatched. The last one also infuriates me, again, a naturopathic website, where they're pushing the idea that if you have suffered from vaccination, if anyone here has been vaccinated, you have vaccination damage, right? And that is you're gonna have to detoxify for the rest of your life. You're gonna have to go on these cleanses for the rest of your life. And you may never clear all the horrible toxins that have been put in you by vaccination. It's going to require naturopathic and homeopathic remedies forever, right? That's the world we live in, and that's the noise that is out there. What's happening? How did we get here? Well, I get a lot of hate mail. I hope I don't get any after this talk, by the way. I get a lot of hate mail. Here's some actual examples of things that people have said to me recently. I'm not going to talk about the size of my penis, don't worry. But this is stuff that people say. But you know what I find is remarkable? What I find is really remarkable is the consistency in the messages I get. Whether I'm talking about homeopathy or vaccination or GMOs or organic food, they all say the same thing. They all say the same thing, and it starts with the idea that science is bad. We can't trust science. And I think it's summed up in what might be the world's greatest headline. This is a real problem, right? And people say, we can't trust you guys because you're bought out by Big Pharma. Apparently, I'm bought out by Big Pharma. We are all in the pocket of big food. The FDA, it can't be trusted because they're just trying to push vaccination. Same with Health Canada. People don't trust the science anymore. And there is a genuine problem here. This is a study that came out yesterday in PLOS Medicine that showed that almost every study that is represented in the popular press is wrong or it's overturned. And people see that and they tell me about it. Say, how can we trust you guys? You can't get anything right. And I'm going to come back to that. That has to do with scientific literacy and how science really works. But this has led to what's been called the war on science. There's a really nice piece here from the National Academy of Science. I had the honor of being part of that project where they tried to map what's causing this breakdown in trust. And I think that the scientific community can play a role in turning this around. But this trust issue certainly is a big part of what's going on with vaccination and vaccination hesitancy. As was noted in this editorial, we have lost some trust here and that people are starting to turn to other sources. And there are a lot of things going on that's spinning science. And this is actually an area where our team does a lot of research. Science is spun from right when it leaves the bench. Did you see the study that came out of the UK recently? That wasn't a big study, but over 50% of the researchers admitted that they lie in order to get research grants. And that's the actual word they used, right? So you see that kind of spin happening. The public picks up on that. It's spun when, of course, it's in press releases from research institutions. Lots of research show that spins happens there. I think there's a lot of ethics hype from my own community. It's spun once it hits the popular press, of course, and then when the market hits it, it's spun even further. So you have all those forces creating what I call, this distrust in the scientific enterprise, and we need to turn that around. Just to give you a sense, now this isn't a very scientific study, but just to give you a sense of who the public says they trust, right? Who do they trust? So this was a survey that was done in the summer, so it was before the election. They ask Reader's Digest, I said, not very scientific, but it's kind of interesting. Who's the 100 most trusted people in the United States? Who do you trust the most in the United States? The top 3? Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington, and Sandra Bullock, right? Celeb, celeb, celeb. Let's go further down the list, see what's going on there. Alex Trebek, woohoo, Canadian. Number 8, we've got a couple scientists in the top 20, that's nice. Dr. Oz, still in the top 20 after all of that controversy. Remarkable, right? Let's go a little further down the list. You got Johnny Depp, right above Supreme Court Justice. Where does Barack Obama sit on this list? 65th. Wow, right below Adam Sandler. Can you see him reading the list? Michelle. So this is the world we live in, right? The other problem, other phenomenon that's going on, of course, this is a very complex issue. I can't go through all of it. But the other phenomenon that's going on, one I feel very strongly about, and is controversial, is I think that there's been an inappropriate embrace of pseudoscience, particularly in the area of health. And you see this tolerance for pseudoscience that often plays out as false balance. Now, this is a very famous interview of Jenny McCarthy on CNN where she laid out her beliefs about the connection between autism and vaccination. And it was Jenny McCarthy, I don't know if people have seen this, you can get the transcripts online. It's Jenny McCarthy and 2 experts from the CDC who've probably spent their entire lives, 2 PhDs studying vaccination, right? And it's them versus Jenny McCarthy, right? Talk about false balance. And who do we remember? I can't even remember those guys' names. We remember Jenny McCarthy. In health, we give so much time to this nonsense. There's this acceptance of perspectives that we would not tolerate in other fields, right? We wouldn't tolerate this in physics. We don't have integrative physics department, right? Where they have, Reiki experts working on jet engines and, you can board now. I think you're good to go. I can feel the energy. But we tolerate that in the context of health. It's like this is a good example. Thank you, Stephen Hawkins. And now for a different perspective on the movement of the stars, we turn to an astrologer. We I think, have got to be more aggressive in debunking, and I'm going to come back to at the end, what is baloney. This is not just because I love science that I believe that I think we need to do this. There is evidence that this has a real impact. So this is a study that shows that just being exposed to false balance, that situation I just described, can impact vaccination intentions. It can create vaccination hesitancy. Just being exposed to conspiracy theories can have an impact on vaccination intentions. So this matters. It's not just infuriating. It matters. The other problem, of course, is this allows the narrative to overwhelm the science. There's lots of interesting research, and you guys maybe even experienced this in your professional careers, that show that a good story, a good narrative, almost always overwhelms the data, right? And that's why celebrities win so often, right? Whether you're talking about a sports star or Jenny McCarthy, an impressive story, an impressive narrative will overwhelm the data. The other problem, and this is another area where I get a little hate mail, is the phenomenon of quackademics. Have you guys heard that phrase before? Quackademics. So this is the embrace of pseudoscience in universities. Quackademics, that's why I got a duck there. This is the embrace of pseudoscience in universities. Now, I'm not going to pick on any university because I could pick on every single one in Canada, but I'll give you a couple of examples of pseudoscience that is happening at universities and being embraced at universities. And I think it's because of this tolerance for pseudoscience. Now, these are just quotes from university websites of things that have absolutely no science behind them at all. And they are presented to the public in an uncritical manner. So if you Google these things for a variety of universities around Canada, you'll get an uncritical portrayal of Reiki as if it works. Now to be clear, if you believe Reiki works, right, you believe there's a life force energy that runs through our bodies that you can manipulate with your hands, right? That's magic. Now, yes, there's a placebo effect, and yes, there is this idea of spending time with someone who cares and is giving you comfort. That is worth studying, but it's portrayed as if it's scientifically valid. That legitimizes pseudoscience. As you pick on McEwen University as one example, this is a good example of the kind of things I'm talking about. So this is on McEwen University's website about acupuncture. And I'm not saying we can't study acupuncture, and I'm not saying there's not critical analysis to be done, but this is, you can get a certificate in acupuncture from McEwen University, and it's portrayed on the website this way. This is supposed to be a science-based institution. It suggests that that energy flows through our bodies through these meridians. No, it doesn't. And then an imbalance in those meridians causes illness. So that is a portrayal of pseudoscience in an uncritical manner by a research institution, and I think that's wrong. And what happens, of course, is the complementary alternative practitioners, the homeopaths, et cetera, use this to legitimize their products. They say the study done at the U of T or being done X, Y, and Z supports the use of these therapies. Now, homeopathy is complete nonsense. It's scientifically impossible, but there's also no evidence to support that it works. And again, this has an impact. This was a study that was done recently. Found that 70% of parents have some concern about risk, which is quite high, I think. But look at that, just over 17% agreed with the incorrect statement that alternative treatments can replace vaccines. 17% of Canadians believe that. And what kind of alternative things are we talking about? Here are some examples from alternative clinics around. I think all of these are from Canada. I think all of them are actually from Alberta or BC, where you have the suggestion that you can have homeopathic injectables to replace vaccination, given a homeopathic remedy instead of vaccination, homeopathic natural immune boost. All of these things are recommended, and they can build on the pseudoscience, the quackademics that is happening really throughout the world. And this matters, you guys. Again, studies have consistently shown a correlation between an embrace of complementary and alternative medicine and vaccination hesitancy. This is just one example that came out not that long ago, published in Pediatrics. And there are lots of other studies. I won't go through all of them, but I will. This bottom one that was Kuman and Wilson, who does great work, University of Ottawa, he goes so far as to suggest that if you have a patient that uses complementary and alternative medicine, that you should view that as a high-risk situation for an individual that's not going to get vaccinated. And there's lots of studies to support that. So if we legitimize this nonsense, we make this problem worse. The other factor that I think is very relevant here is social media. Social media is changing the way that science is being distributed. It's changing the way that people talk about health, and it's changing the way people learn about different kinds of health strategies. It really is remarkable. Right now, we're doing lots of research on social media and how social media is being used both to debate these issues, but also to disseminate this information. And we can't underestimate the degree to which celebrities own social media. They own social media. So this is my friend Katy Perry again. Hey, Katy. And now she's holding up, I don't know if you've ever seen this before. This is Katy on Twitter, Katy Perry on Twitter. And she's holding up a bag full of all the supplements she takes every day. So she takes 26 supplements a day. Of course, there's no evidence to support the taking of supplements almost full stop. But here she is telling the world about it. Why do we care? How many followers does Katy Perry have? Do you guys know? 1 million, try 100 million. She has 100 million followers. So when she tweets that out, it goes to 100 million people. And there's really interesting research that shows that people develop these parasocial relationships with Katy and with people that tweet in general. So you're walking down the street and you get a tweet from Katy Perry. It feels like she's talking to you. And that I follow her, so I know. And it increases the power that celebrities have over us. And there's some really interesting work that shows that this is happening. But just to put things in perspective, okay? Katy Perry has 100 million followers, okay? The World Health Organization has 3 million, right? That's, how many do you guys have? Let's see. Woohoo! Woo! I love that you have one, though. That's awesome. That's awesome. Actually, it's more than that. I checked this morning. I think it's 216. But that matters. At least you have one, right? So this matters because research has shown that social media is a giant confirmation machine, right? It's a confirmation bias machine. That's what social media is. It's a massive echo chamber. Interesting work on this, and we've done some research on this too. And unfortunately, research shows on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook, the information is terrible and mostly negative about vaccination, right? Really heartbreaking and really aggravating. And then you see, of course, layer on top of that, all the issues are around fake news and the power of fake news in this domain, and it becomes incredibly difficult situation. This was a nice study that was done very recently, a nice Canadian study that shows what is creating vaccination hesitancy in Canada. What's creating concern about vaccination? It's a lack of knowledge about vaccines, no surprise. It's the diffusion of negative information, which is just touched on. But look at this. The study did find that most of it comes from online sources and social media. So this really does matter, you guys. This is having an impact, whether it's coming from Katy Perry or some other nutball. So what's next? By the way, that's my brother's piece, he does awesome work. So what's next? I think there are things that we can do. I think there are things that we all can do and people in this room can do, this community can do. First of all, I think we need to have a more robust regulatory response. We are starting to see that. I would like to see more truth in advertising. We have a project we're working on right now where we're going to try to make that happen. We have, I think the professional colleges need to become more involved. If they see a healthcare provider circulating bunk, I think they need to move quickly and shut that down. I think we need to create more science-based standards of care. And the other thing I'd like to see is policy statements by trusted voices, right? So the FDA is starting to do this. Health Canada recently did it. So I think we need to do that. Here's a good example of a response in the United States. This is from the FTC. And this came out not that long ago. And the FTC, so if you are in the United States right now and you want to sell a homeopathic product as a result of this new guideline, you have to put on your product, this does not work, right? That's what's required. I'm paraphrasing there. But that's basically what, I like that. I'd like to see that coming from Health Canada. I'd like to see that coming from elsewhere. So we're starting to see a little bit of a shift, and that's a great thing. The other thing we need is scientific literacy, and I don't just mean teaching more science, it's teaching the scientific process. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but so often the public perceives science as a list of facts, and if one of those facts is wrong, science is wrong, right? And I think increasingly we need to emphasize that science is a process. It's a worldview. It's a way of understanding the universe. And there's a little bit of research that shows if you do show that, it can have an impact and perhaps change people's minds. The other thing that we need is creative communication strategies. And we saw that this morning, the students with their project. That's exactly the kind of stuff that I think we need. We need to think of different ways of engaging. And there's a little bit of research to show exactly that. Now, I said earlier the power of narratives and the power of anecdotes. It matters. It really does get things across. Now, what we need to be careful, we don't want to fight anecdote with anecdote, but we do want to use stories and narratives to get across the good science, right? To use that as a vehicle to get the good science across. The other thing, of course, we need is good independent science. We need science that people can trust, right? I don't want to see those headlines anymore. I don't want people telling me I can't trust you. I think we need to have good, trusted voices. And this room is full of those voices. I think we all need to be part of the conversation, which takes me to the next one. Let's get involved. Let's all be out there. And the last thing I think we need to do is we need to call it bunk when it's bunk. I think we have to stop giving room. And there's a little bit of evidence to show that can work. We need to talk about the weight of evidence, right? And now don't allow this kind of false balance portrayal to play out. Let's talk about the weight of evidence. So when you're talking about vaccinations, we're talking about a mountain of evidence that this is effective, that this is generally safe, versus Jenny McCarthy, right? So let's get out there and let's communicate. Let's be part of the conversation and call it bunk when it's bunk. And I think that this really can make a difference. There's a little evidence to show that if we hammer away at what the truth means, yes, it's hard to change that individual's mind, but long term, I believe science eventually wins. So I'm going to end there. I think that's the end. Oh, the last thing I want to point out, there's a study that came out very recently that showed that this can work. I don't know if you saw this. They called it a psychological vaccine. If you prime people to be thoughtful and to be aware and to be critical, it can make a difference. And it does, the effect size wasn't huge, but it did make a difference. So let's all be part of that story. Let's try to use our psychological vaccines every day to change people's minds here. I'd like to thank all the wonderful artists that I've had the opportunity to work with. And by the way, we hope this book will be out this year. We're actually negotiating with a great publisher. And it's a privilege to work with these individuals all. In fact, they are going to be having a show both in Geneva and in Norway, showing all of this work in connection with a pro-vaccine message. And I'd like to thank my fantastic research team, my interdisciplinary research team. And again, thanks to Lauren and Michael for the opportunity to work with you. So I'll end there and say thanks very, very much.
Thank you, Tim, for an awesome and very important talk. Before we open it up, and you get points for being
I tried.
Short. Excellent. So
yes.
we can have lots of discussion. Just the one thing I'll add, and you kind of touched on it, but again, it's the importance of us as scientists making thoughtful, well-considered, community-engaged decisions. And I think one example that I can give in my current experience is influenza vaccination strategies in the province of Ontario, and a leading public health expert has some issues with the way we're going out and saying everybody needs to be vaccinated. So it's really, there's a major responsibility on our part, and you can help us understand how to move forward. So I guess we'll start with mic number 1 over there.
Thank you. My name is Sandy Léo-Laframboise. I'm a peer researcher in Vancouver on hepatitis C and HIV, and I'm Indigenous. So thank you for your presentation, and thank you about saying you want to debunk vaccines and all that. But if this applies to all medicines, that you think that allopathic medicines don't work, we need to debunk you. And the reason being is we as Indigenous people and around the world, other Indigenous communities are doing the same thing. We're using a two-eye-seeing approach, saying, okay, the Western traditional medicine context works. It has some very good medicine, but the Indigenous context also works and has some good medicine, and we have to walk together that way. And the reason we're saying two-eye-seeing is when you go to the optometrist, they test both eyes to give you one prescription, right? So the two can work together and not against each other. And I think we have to be careful around that. So thank you for your work. And yes, there's a lot of myth around vaccines, but not around every medicine. And every culture around the world is still 70% of the world population using alternative therapies in conjunction.
Can I comment on that? I mean, thank you very much.
But I'm giving you my comment. So thank you.
No, thank you very, very much. I think that's an important message. And as you can imagine, it's one I hear often. So this is not going to be a popular position with everyone, but I don't think there's Western science and Eastern science. I think there is science, and I think that that is the way that we need to. I don't think there's. I hate the term allopathic. That was a term that's used by complementary alternative practitioners to compartmentalize and create a false dichotomy. I think there's health interventions that work and there's those that don't work. I think we all need to keep an open mind, but I also think we need to be respectful of other traditions, and I think that we need to be open-minded to the benefit that communities receive from those other traditions. And I think that we can do that without framing it as science-based. There's things that work and there are things that don't work. And you'll notice I was very careful in the ones I picked. I get upset when it's portrayed as if it is science-based, as if there's evidence behind it. I think that we can have different worldviews, and I think we can have different philosophies. And let's portray it that way. Let's not portray it as if it's all science-based. But thank you very much. I think it's an important point.
I'm glad you said that last piece. Mine's also a comment that's a bit similar. The importance of really honoring and respecting different people's understanding of health and how to heal. And I think actually the best way to reach, in terms of hepatitis C, we know hepatitis C is prevalent amongst immigrants and newcomers that come often from different traditions of understanding health and healing, where, for example, acupuncture might be an important part of that healing process. And I think that in terms of testing and building trust and working with diverse populations, we want to be really respectful. And I'd very much worry about taking an approach that's focused on debunking those approaches and instead, like you were saying, honoring that actually, there's a lot of approaches that can be helpful, and how can we work together? And I think some of the language that was presented was quite aggressive against those modalities that people's cultures and traditions are founded in. So, and I also think that it's not absurd and crazy to imagine that the government, big pharma, and even the healthcare industry doesn't always have our best interest at heart. So I think there's a lot I think sometimes portraying these other pieces as crazy and unfounded may not be the best approach, and how can we actually work together?
So let me respond to that too. Now, I actually spend most of my academic, as even Lauren knows, most of my academic career on science, on stem cells, debunking stem cells, on science hype, on the impact of pharma on biasing data. So I am very sensitive to that. But the problem is that does not justify the integration of other stuff that works. It's almost like people saying, well, we want our turn to provide stuff that doesn't work. And what we need is good science in general. Now, as I said over here, I think we can still respect these traditions. The problem is, and I can give you lots and lots of examples, is they are presented as if they are science-based. They're presented as if there is evidence to support them, and there isn't, right? Those clinics that are offering homeopathy they suggest that there is evidence to support them, and there isn't. And I don't think, and there's this sort of postmodern ethos that has allowed this tolerance for this stuff, and that's why I get hate mail. I mean, I know that, and it's a hard position to hold sometimes, but I believe it's the right one. We've seen what happens when critical thinking breaks down. We've seen what happens when we tolerate pseudoscience and alternate views of reality. Let's be honest about what the science says, and we can do that in a manner that's respectful to these other traditions. And in fact, I think long-term, separating them, right, saying that this is a worldview, a philosophy, a way of living, will allow those to thrive better than science. Because if we try to call it science, they're going to lose, and science is going to win.
No, we're not.
I would just.
Wow, I didn't know it was going to be.
I just think some of the language, if you're looking to be respectful of these other traditions, the language in a presentation like yours, some of it comes across as not fully respectful.
I understand that, but you know what I did? I picked modalities that I don't mind using aggressive language with. So I was very careful, actually. I picked homeopathy, which is complete bunk. I picked detoxing, which is complete bunk. And I also picked Reiki, which I think also has, there's no science to support it. That's probably the one that's probably the most sensitive. Sorry.
Mike, one, Dina.
Hello, this is Dina Chancer from the Public Health Agency. I guess as being able to do research, one of the things that's quite sensitive is not to step over the line into policy too much. I really enjoyed your talk, and what I liked much is the weight of evidence. And I know those of us involved in guidelines and so on, this is sort of the up-and-coming area that we are focusing a lot in. I thought to take a look at what you're saying and sort of put it in the perspective of the weight of evidence. I've seen enough cases where the science has been overinterpreted in public health. We want to do something now, and we just don't read that the science isn't there to support us, so we make a decision. We call it evidence-based very many times. We have lots of people that aren't scientists making policy decisions that aren't actually researchers. And so the weight of evidence, I think, was really the point that really stuck out in this talk of yours, and really to sort of look at and frame it more around the weight of evidence. It becomes a lot less argumentative. I know that's your opinion. That's not my opinion. The weight of evidence is, how many scientific articles are there that actually support any one point of view. And I guess I know with the influenza vaccination of around in 2006, I guess there was a very heavy controversy on, okay, how many lives does vaccination actually prevent? And all the scientific evidence said, okay, those over 65 who were vaccinated, it reduces their mortality, and meaning all-cause mortality rate by 50%. Total bonkers, but that was around for quite a while. And the weight of evidence may actually have been high. So I do recognize that there's a lot of science on itself. You're just arguing science, and how that's interpreted may be quite different. The weight of evidence and promoting that, I think, would let me buy in a lot easier to seeing sort of how some of that moves forward. And that's just a thought on sort of my reaction. I did enjoy the talk very much.
So the weight of I hope that came across, because I share your views entirely. I think that no, it's the weight of evidence of the science, right? So I'm always, as I
So
said.
I think we're going to have to,
Oh, sorry.
I think this is important, but offline, I think we only have time for one more question. I guess, Curtis, you're going to get
Great. So thanks. So it strikes me as currently the press is dedicated to amplifying populist opinion. It would be nice, at least in my opinion, if they were perpetrators of the truth. Do you hold the press responsible for what's happening in our world, or are they off the hook?
You have 30 seconds to respond.
I don't, actually. I call it a hype train. So I'm going to go back to critiquing science. And if you look at, I call it a hype pipeline. And I tried to portray it a little bit here. The press is part of the story, but it plays out throughout the knowledge generation process. There are problems throughout it. And unfortunately, they're all complicit collaborators. So there's a little bit of twist all the way along, and then unfortunately the public is at the end. So that's one of the reasons I really emphasize this idea that we need to really pursue and create incentives that allow for good, independent, trustworthy scientific information, because I think long-term, that's the most important thing. That's what's going to allow us to win. That's what's going to defeat Katy Perry.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks so much, you guys, for listening to me and these perspectives. I can talk to you after.
Saying the science, in the sense of pure science, as we talk, is only 125 years old, and most of the medicines are based on our herbs and testing through our herbs and our medicines. And our medicines is thousands of years old. And
I think maybe next year we'll need a session for
together,
yes,
not against
yes,
each other.
yes.
And that kind of talk is making us fight each other, not walk together.
And maybe, Negla, next year we can have a whole afternoon where we can talk about this.